Hello, I'm Gordon Lang, editor of CameraLabs.com. I'd like to give you a brief video tour around the Nikon D700. Here it is, the D700. This model is positioned between the semi-professional D300 and the flagship D3 models in Nikon's DSLR lineup. And I've got it mounted here with the rather spectacular looking Nikon AFS 14-24mm lens. Now this is an ultra wide angle model and you can see exactly the kind of pictures you can take with it if you check out our full review of the D700 at CameraLabs.com. Now the D700 is Nikon's second ever full frame digital SLR, and in fact it shares exactly the same 12.1 megapixel sensor as the flagship D3. So what's all the fuss about full frame anyway? Well, it's all about the fact that a full frame sensor is considerably larger than a traditional cropped frame sensor that you find in most other DSLRs. In fact, it's exactly the same size as a frame of 35mm film, and that gives it two main benefits. The first is that there's no field reduction when you attach a lens, so there's none of this having to multiply the focal length by 1.5, 1.6 or even 2 times. If you mount a 14mm lens like this one onto this body, then you really do get 14mm coverage from it. Although you will also need a lens that is corrected up to those edges of that full frame. The second benefit comes from that larger sensor surface area. It means it's simply more sensitive to light. This camera has the same number of pixels as the D300, but with a bigger sensor, those pixels are physically larger, and that allows it to deliver lower noise, especially at higher sensitivities. In fact, the D700 offers sensitivities up to 25,600 ISO, and again you can see examples of how it looks at those settings in our full review of this camera at CameraLabs.com. But as you may well expect, there's a ton of features that I've got to go over, so without further ado, let's take a closer look at some of them. First up, autofocus. Like the D3 and D300 before it, the new D700 features nothing less than a 51-point autofocusing system, and that allows it to very accurately track subjects that are moving all across the frame. The D700 is also equipped with a 3-inch VGA screen. That's got twice as many pixels horizontally and vertically compared to typical 230K monitors, and in use the fonts look incredibly smooth on menus, and the detail that you can see in playback is absolutely amazing. As you can see, the D700 also features live view facilities, and I'll be demonstrating more of those later on in the video. In terms of continuous shooting, the D700 can fire at 5 frames per second. Now that may sound a little bit slower than the 6 frames per second of the D300, but crucially with this model it can maintain that speed even when it's shooting the top quality 14-bit RAW files. And here's how it sounds. The D700 has also inherited the handy virtual horizon feature from the flagship D3. This allows you to check whether the camera is level, and it works through the optical viewfinder or on the screen at the back. New to the D700 though is the ability to also use this virtual horizon in live view mode, although Nikon has generously now offered this on the D3 with a firmware update. As you'd expect from one of Nikon's top-end DSLRs, the build quality on the D700 is absolutely superb. It's very tough, it's both dust and moisture resistant, and very solid. It feels like it could handle almost anything you throw at it. The D700 is also very comfortable to hold and use. Nikon's got its ergonomics just right with this camera, so let's take a closer look at some of its controls. Many of the D700's controls are the same as that on the D300, so in the top left corner you'll find the same release mode dial. Hold down this button and it allows you to turn the dial to change it from single to continuous shooting, live view, the self-timer or mirror lockup. You'll also notice on top of this dedicated buttons for the white balance, the quality and the ISO sensitivity. To change any of those, you just hold down those buttons while turning either the thumb dial or the finger dial. On the upper right side of the body you'll notice this large LCD information screen. It's a tad smaller than that of the D300, but it still conveys a massive amount of information. Turning to the back of the camera, the major physical difference that you'll see here between the D700 and the D300 is this larger viewfinder area. This is to accommodate the larger pentaprism that you need for the full frame sensor. You also notice this circular viewfinder styling from the flagship D3, and also this little lever here which you can use to close a curtain in the viewfinder. This prevents stray light from entering. Looking further on the back of the camera, you'll see it looks at first glance pretty similar to the D300, although eagle-eyed Nikon followers will notice that this control is actually taken from the D3, so it has a separate confirmation button in the middle. Looking further down here you'll see the other physical difference. There's now an info button where the memory card door lever used to be. If you press this, you can actually display shooting information, very detailed shooting information at that as well, on the beautiful VGA screen. Press it once more and you can see you can highlight some of these options at the bottom. This gives you very quick access to various settings, and this is one of the new features of the D700 over the D300. However, by putting the info button here, the D700 has lost that lever that opens the memory card door. So now you're left with something much more basic, similar to that what you'd find on, say, the D80. It's just a simple clip open and clip shut operation, which some people might think is pretty basic for a camera of this price. The D700 takes compact flash memory cards. It's also UDMA compatible, so if you have one of those cards, you can get very quick performance from this camera. The live view implementation on the D700 is very similar to that of the D300, but there's some subtle variations I'll point out as we go along. Now we're in live view, and to prove that I'll just wiggle my fingers in front of the camera's lens. Now this is the D700's handheld mode, and one of the first new things I'm going to show you is the info button to the bottom right of the screen. If I press this, I can turn the shooting information off. Press it again, I can overlay a grid. Now that was previously a menu option on the D300, so that's much more convenient. Press it once more and you get the virtual horizon, which I showed you earlier. To autofocus, you'll need to press the AF on button. Now what happened there was the mirror flipped up in order to use the traditional phase change autofocus system, so of course the picture was interrupted and you heard some noise, but the reading was taken, you heard the double beep, and now the focus is confirmed. Now the D700 offers an alternative autofocusing mode in live view, and that's called tripod based mode. So let's activate that now by going back into the menu system, go to the live view options here and change it from handheld to tripod. Once again, press the shutter release button to enter this mode. And you'll see that red square in the middle. That represents where the D700 is going to focus. So once again, I press the AF on button to autofocus. Here's what happens. Now you'll notice that that took a little bit longer than before, but you'll also notice that there was no noise. The mirror didn't flip up and there was no interruption to the image. This is because it's using a contrast-based autofocusing technique, very similar to that on compact cameras. But what makes this much more useful is you can actually move this focusing area around to a different portion. So let's say I want to focus on this part of the image here. No problem at all. I've just moved the square and then press the AF on button again to autofocus on that point. Again, it takes a couple of seconds, but it will autofocus anywhere on that frame. The other really useful thing I can do is use the magnifying button to actually zoom in on that area to confirm that focus. This is actually looking at every pixel on the screen, and I'll show you that focusing process once more. So this is clearly a very useful facility to have if you're into things like macro photography. Sadly, the one thing that the D700 doesn't have in live view though is a live histogram. The Nikon D700 is quite simply one of the most impressive DSLRs we've ever tested at CameraLabs.com, and that really shouldn't come as any surprise, because what Nikon's essentially done with this body is take the superb high ISO performance of the flagship D3 and squeeze it into a body that, relatively speaking anyway, is much smaller, lighter and more affordable. So does that make the D700 the ultimate DSLR available today? Well, perhaps, so long as your wallet can take it. Because at the time we made this video, the D700 body was priced at approximately double that of the D300. And remember, the D300 also has the same resolution, a 51-point AF system, the same 3-inch VGA screen with live view, and also a tough body that's dust and moisture resistant. So really the specifications between those two cameras are very, very similar. It's just the sensor size that really differs between them. So you've really got to ask yourself, can you justify the money for that full frame performance? And you should also bear in mind that to make the most of full frame, you'll also need decent quality lenses that deliver sharp performance right up to the edges of that larger frame. So of course the big question is just how much better is the D700 at high sensitivities than the D300? Well, to find out, head on over to our full review at CameraLabs.com, because there you'll find results directly comparing the D700 against the D300 and also that other affordable full framer, the Canon EOS 5D. In our full review of the D700, you'll also find out about all of the features of this camera, because there's certainly plenty of them. And you'll also see up-to-date pricing, because while there will still be a big differential for full frame in the future, hopefully the price of this camera will gradually come down. So once again, to find out everything you need to know about the D700 and how it measures up, head on over to our full review. You'll find it at www.cameralabs.com.